A Sith should always think on a grand scale. These were the words of Emperor Palpatine on the topic of superweapons. The capability to destroy a planet was the second most sought after ability of the Sith, right behind immortality. But they were not alone in this pursuit. In the galaxy far, far away, wars are not simply fought between nations, but between entire worlds and systems. In battles of large scale, sometimes the conventional weapons of warfare were not enough to make the proper impact. This is what gave rise to the superweapons, machines of mass destruction. Superweapons are often the cornerstone of many stories and adventures in the galaxy. Of course, it was the Death Star that stands at the very center of it all. The Death Star's destruction was so significant that it continues to serve as the metric for our dating system in the lore. But there were many, many more superweapons used by the Empire, by the Sith, and by several other galactic factions. And in today's Holocron, we aim to dive into the Legends history to find the most horrific superweapons ever created in lore. We'll talk about their design, give an overview of their history, and most entertainingly perhaps, discuss their overall destructive output. When making this list, we quickly encountered one very distinct issue. The classification of what constitutes a superweapon is very broad. As a result, there are dozens of superweapons, so many that if we didn't create some parameters, we would be here all day long. So we have decided on 3 important rules for this holocron. Firstly, the weapon has to cause significant damage or death to sentient life. So large ion weapons such as the Malevolence or the Republic's EMP nuke will not be counted, since they only affect large quantities of technology. Our superweapons must have a direct destructive effect on sentient organic life. Second, our superweapons cannot be purely force abilities. If the superweapon is force-based, then it must have a conduit such as a machine or an object. There are force powers such as the Thought Bomb or Vitiate's Absorption Ritual, but in our opinion, those should have a classification all of their own. And if you would like a video about force-based superweapons, then we will gladly do one. And third, and final, the superweapons on this list have a mass damage threshold. They must have a destructive force that is beyond city level. We encountered several superweapons that were designed for vehicles or capital ships, but there were so many of them that we have to narrow it down to weapons that were meant for mass destruction of a populace or an equivalent thereof. Having said that, there are 2 distinct outliers of this rule, but we'll explain those in a moment. Now, with that out of the way, we've got over 20 superweapons to break down. Let us begin. Number 1. The Starforge. The Starforge may be one of the most useful but overlooked superweapons in galactic history. It is a unique weapon in that it itself doesn't destroy, but rather it creates. Built by the ancient Rakatan race, the Starforge hovers over the planet of Lehon, drawing power from the star Abo. Using the energy from the star and the power of the dark side, it can create an endless supply of starships and weapons. It can create basically any sort of machinery fed into it by the one controlling it. Right off the bat, we are sort of breaking our own established rules, since the Starforge itself doesn't directly cause mass destruction. However, no superweapon list can be complete without the Starforge, since it was one of the earliest proto-superweapons to exist in the lore and is one of the earliest in the entire Star Wars timeline. Not to mention the ships that it creates can easily do their fair share of population destruction. Technically, it has the potential to create other superweapons if one is fed into the schematics of the system. But even if this doesn't happen, any being who possessed the Starforge was immediately the strongest individual in almost any war. One of the most important aspects about galactic warfare is industrialism. The ability to create ships and weapons for one's own war effort is obviously going to be the main catalyst to any victory. In fact, the Republic itself, despite almost always being on the back foot in the war, usually comes out on top because of its many industrial worlds. But the Starforge is worth more than all of them put together, because it doesn't require any money, it doesn't require laborers, and it doesn't require raw materials that have to be mined and then shipped. It simply uses the energy of its star, and the force to generate as many ships as desired. Its production outclasses even the Republic's massive industry, which is one of the reasons that Darth Revan and Darth Malak dominated in the Jedi Civil War. It is rumored that producing endless technology is not the only function of the Starforge though. Utilizing the dark side meant that the forge itself was sentient, and had a will all its own. Malak was convinced that it held dark secrets just waiting to be discovered, and so he became obsessed with plumbing into the depths of its power. Malak discovered that its ability to feed on the Force extended to draining every ounce of essence from Jedi, funneling it into a single source. Using this knowledge, Malak kidnapped many Jedi and imprisoned them within the Starforge, draining them dry of their power and channeling it into himself. It was so good at this that Jedi who died on the Starforge could not become one with the Force. Rather, their spirits were harnessed for power, and so long as Malak stood upon the station with the function alive and active, Malak was invincible. However, the weapon was not without its issues. The first major issue is that it was beholden to the one using it, but it had other intentions for its masters. The Starforge had the tendency to corrupt those who used it, to drive them insane even. The Starforge would only be commanded for so long before it decided to start calling its own shots. It suggested that this was one of the reasons the ancient Rakatan Empire crumbled. The Starforge turned against them, drove many of them insane. Revan actually picked up on this and decided to limit his own contact with the machine. Revan only visited it so often to observe production or to give the Forge new orders. Immediately after he would depart. Malak did not see to this though, and was possessed with the madness induced by the Forge. Malak became obsessed with it, and spent prolonged periods of time trying to discover its secrets. Soon enough, Malak was a slave to its power. The second issue is that the Forge itself was quite vulnerable. It had a self-repair function, which is how it remained self-sustaining and operational for tens of thousands of years, but its defensive armament was very light. It had very few turbo lasers around its docking bays, but the Forge largely relied on ship production as its primary means of defense. So if the secret location got out, a blockade had to remain stationed around the Forge at all times to keep the enemy at bay. This ended up being a huge detriment. Malak had corrupted the Jedi Bastila Shan to the dark side, and had used her powers in battle meditation to unify the defensive fleet around the Forge. This kept the Jedi fleet from penetrating the blockade. But once Revan turned Bastila back to the light, the Republic was able to break through the defense line very easily and destroyed the Dark Factory. The overall destructive output of the Starforge is its ability to create an endless supply of warships at no manufacturing cost. As a result, calculating its damage potential is difficult, since it's more of an indirect method of destruction than a direct one, but its mere presence gives us a sizable advantage to whatever faction controls it, allowing them to completely turn the tide of a war. To that end, the Starforge may be the most difficult weapon to quantify on this list, as its destructive potential could be anywhere from a single enemy fleet to an entire civilization, so we'll leave that up to you. Number 2. The Sunrazer in its creations. The Sunrazer was essentially the evolution of the Starforge. Where the Forge was designed to build fleets, the Sunrazer was the same thing except for other superweapons. Developed by Darth Mechis and Vitiate's Sith Empire, this was a massive space station that was positioned over stars and leached their energy for material that could be used to create these weapons. The energy it collected was much more efficient than strip mining worlds one by one. Because of this, super weapons that would normally take a decade to construct could be done so in a tenth of the time when built by the Sunrazer. We have decided to lump it and its creations together into one category, since only limited information is available about each of them, and we determined that the Sunrazer and its spawn cumulatively make up the pieces of a single terrifying unit that should qualify it for our list. There were 5 known superweapons birthed from the Sunrazer. The first was the Ascendant Spear, a Terminus-class destroyer that had been modified with a Class 0.5 hyperdrive. This made it the fastest ship in hyperspace compared to other capital ships of the era. But the real power of the ship came from its unique design of being the perfect blend of man and machine. Through bionic implants, its captain, Malgus's apprentice, Darth Carad, communed with and controlled the ship directly via her mind. She would channel the dark side of the Force into the ship's systems and enhance its capabilities. This allowed it to exceed its Class 0.5 hyperdrive system and made its weapon systems operate with flawless precision. Imagine a capital ship operating at the speed and accuracy of a lightsaber duelist with Force-imbued reflexes. That is the Ascendant Spear. The second superweapon it produced was the Gauntlet, a light-speed cannon that was capable of shooting targets in hyperspace. This was a feat previously thought to be impossible. The giant cannon was mounted between the 2 prongs of the battleship, The Republic feared this weapon so much that they broke the Cold War just to destroy it, thus ending the ceasefire. The third superweapon was known as the Emperor's Shadow, a mysterious creation commissioned personally by Darth Malgus. The Emperor's Shadow boasted one of the earliest cloaking devices in recorded galactic history, a technology that was still in its experimental phase as late as the Clone Wars. The fourth weapon was a machine that's more deserving of a superweapon title than the others, known as the Silencer. Its ominous name deserves the terror that it invokes. The Silencer was a gargantuan ship-mounted cannon with the ability to take down several capital ships in rapid succession. It was dubbed the Fleet Killer due to its power and rate of fire. And the final superweapon from the Sunrazer was something called the Undying. The Undying was a large capital ship with capabilities remaining horrifyingly unknown, but despite its quieter nature, it was said that every creation from the Sunrazer required enough power to turn Coruscant dark. So whatever the weapon does, it could be just as destructive, or perhaps worse than what we mentioned previously. The Sunrazer and the Starforge are the outliers that we mentioned in the beginning, but from here on out, we will be sticking to the rules that we established, which brings us neatly to number 3. The Eternal Fleet. The Eternal Fleet was an entity that gave power to the Eternal Empire in its heyday. It was the weapon most sought after Emperor Valkorion, and the reason his empire subjugated the entire galaxy in its era. The fleet was comprised of hundreds upon hundreds of advanced battleships, which were all self-piloting by a series of droids. They were a sentient hive-minded droid program known as the Gemini Captains, those that were answerable only to the one who sat upon the Eternal Throne. Each of the Eternal warships were faster and more powerful than any ship in the known galaxy at the time, and they all possessed advanced cloaking technology. But what made them so dangerous was that, because of their Gemini droid piloting, they could execute extremely precise maneuvers and formations that made the fleet as a whole nearly unstoppable. Specific formations resulted in different effects. Energy linked between each ship to charge into a defensive shield wall, while another formation caused them to charge an ultimate attack that could wipe out an entire fleet. It could play offense and defense at the same time. All of the ship hulls were nearly impenetrable to boot, so they could only be destroyed in one of two ways. Either by self-destruction from the inside, or by a very specific warship known as the Gravestone. The Eternal Fleet was built many centuries before the Golden Age of the Sith, by an unknown race and species from the planet of Iokath. The fate of these ancient builders remains unknown, but their legacy was one of horror and destruction. The first known action of the Eternal Fleet was the annihilation of all life in wild space. Legend has it that the Eternal Fleet spread across wild space and conquered almost every inhabited world within the region, including the planet of Zakul. That was, until it was defeated by the Gravestone. The Eternal Throne was then lost in the swamps of Zakul, until located by Valkorion thousands of years later. Valkorion never actually got to put the ships to widespread use though, but his son Arcan would. Once Arcan seized the throne, he conquered both the Republic and the Sith Empire, subjugating all of them to his will. Using only the power of the Eternal Fleet, the galaxy was answerable only to Emperor Arcan. Arcan allowed them to continue their war beneath him, but only so long as they paid him tribute. In order to defeat the Eternal Fleet, the Alliance had to uncover the ancient Gravestone and use it against them. At the same time, they had to wrestle control of the throne away from Arcan, and eventually his mad younger sister Valen. The reason we have placed the Eternal Fleet above the Starforge is due to its apparent indestructibility, which makes it stronger than what the Starforge can produce. Not to mention, the ships from the Starforge still require staffing, while the Eternal Fleet was fully automated. However, there existed one definitive weakness. If one of the ships were to be destroyed while they were still charging up their super attack, then a chain reaction would occur, taking out many more vessels in its formation sector. At number 4, appropriately, we have the Gravestone itself. So far for our superweapons, they've consisted of powerful fleets, but what about a ship designed to be a fleet killer? This was the title given to the Silencer, but the only ship that truly deserved this name was the Gravestone. The Gravestone was a ship designed to be the counter-weapon to the Eternal Fleet. The ship was built by the mysterious scientists of Iokath, who were forced to shut down the Eternal Fleet since it had gotten out of control. This single ship was able to shut down the entire fleet and force it into hibernation. Not too long afterwards, it was also scuttled and laid to rest in Zakuul's endless swamp. Its main weapon was the Omnicannon, the only weapon capable of actually damaging any Eternal Fleet warship. Once fired, the shot from the Omnicannon would spread to the other nearby warships, systematically taking down entire fleets with a single blast. Once the heroic Alliance got their hands on the Gravestone, they went to war with the Eternal Fleet. Their first shot from the cannon took out 24 warships, and again, these ships were more powerful than anything seen in the galaxy at the time. So if the Gravestone were to be used against any other fleet, it could potentially wipe out more than 24. It was created to destroy the fleet of the strongest ships ever made. So if turned against structures of weaker make, the Gravestone's Omnicannon would reduce them to atoms. Not much information exists about the Gravestone, unfortunately, but it was instrumental in overthrowing the Eternal Empire and freeing the galaxy from their clutches. It is ultimately unknown what happened to this magnificent warship, as it was lost following the Great Galactic War. At number 5, we have the Eye of Palpatine. This overlooked machine is actually considered to be the very first superweapon ever produced by the Galactic Empire. This reserves it a special place of honor, because the Empire made a lot of superweapons. The Eye of Palpatine was a gargantuan dreadnought that was designed to look exactly like an asteroid. This gave it an uncanny means of camouflage and a distinctly unfair ambush ability, since it could simply drift out of an asteroid field and instantly threaten an entire world. It was also thought that its disguise was to keep the early Imperial Senate from discovering it, which would have sparked outrage. The vessel was something between a warship and a battle moon, with firepower that rivaled and possibly exceeded an entire fleet. By itself, the Eye of Palpatine was capable of carrying out full base Delta Zero operations. That is, it could reduce the upper crust of a planet to molten slag through orbital bombardment using only its own weapons. The size of the Eye of Palpatine surpassed that of Vader's Executor-class Super Star Destroyer, meaning it was larger than approximately 11.8 miles, or 19 kilometers. It possessed at least 8 hangar bays, and a full complement of TIE squadrons and troop transports to boot. But the most curious thing about the Eye of Palpatine was that it required absolutely no crew to operate. It was manned only by an advanced artificial intelligence, one that simply carried out orders once activated. This is likely what helped it remain so secret in the Empire, since thousands of men weren't having to be diverted to manning this vessel. It was designed by a man by the name of Oran Keldor for Palpatine in the year 18 BBY. Although its design was somewhat overkill, Palpatine had intended for its use on Jedi hunting. Its first mission was to annihilate a specific location on the world of Belsavis, where it was rumored that the children of the Jedi were being sheltered by Master Plett. The Children of the Jedi was a massive group of trainees and younglings that had been rescued by Master Plett and hidden on the world. However, despite the attempts at secrecy, 2 Jedi Knights, Geeth Eris and Castilla Ming, discovered them. They discovered and sabotaged the vessel before it could be used for its insidious plan. But Ming was forced to trap her spirit in the ship's computers in order to stop it, as its advanced AI could not be overwritten. Master Plett and the Children of the Jedi were able to leave Belsavis and escape. The Emperor, furious at the failure of his plans, imprisoned several of the project managers for the loss of the Eye. However, the Eye of Palpatine would be discovered many years after the fall of the Empire. By then, Luke Skywalker and his Jedi were forced to take care of the issue once and for all, freeing the spirit of Ming in the process. The Eye of Palpatine is a very unconventional weapon. There have been many dreadnoughts created that were intended to carry the power of an entire fleet, but this was one of the only creations that was disguised as an asteroid. The added bonus of it being manned by an unstoppable artificial intelligence meant that it was a perfect Jedi-killing superweapon. There were no crewmen to disguise as or mind trick, and its inner mechanisms were apparently so airtight that not even 2 Jedi Knights could sabotage it with conventional methods. At 6, we have the Mandalorian nukes. Just like slug throwers, our world's weapons did exist in the galaxy far, far away, and this includes nuclear weapons, though they were seldom seen and rarely used. Their first and most notable appearance was in the year 3963 BBY, during the Mandalorian Wars. Somehow, the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, under the leadership of Cassius Fett, acquired a supply of nuclear missiles. They were first used in the Battle of Sirocco, and their threat was so great that Force wielders across the galaxy received vivid visions of their usage. Padawan Zane Carrick had attempted to ward Commander Kareth, who was in charge of the fleet over Sirocco. However, Kareth believed that he was a Mandalorian spy and refused to believe him. This would prove to be a grave error. The Mandalorians arrived shortly thereafter and launched a barrage of nuclear missiles. You see, many of the Republic military emplacements had been constructed in or around civilian cities at the time. They thought the Mandalorians would not dishonor themselves by attacking civilian targets, and so they believed their placements would be safe. However, Mandalore the Ultimate saw this move as cowardly and chose to prove the Republic wrong. The nuclear missiles swerved around the fleet and impacted the world's surface. The entire north side of the planet was lit up by at least a dozen nuclear weapons, annihilating thousands of lives and sending shockwaves in the Force. The loss of life would have been drastically more substantial had it not been for Lieutenant Carth Onasi, the only one who believed Zane. He had been ordered to detain the young Padawan, but instead allowed him to go free. He then sent a distress announcement to the surface of the world, ordering the population to take shelter. This ended up saving the lives of millions. The Mandalorians would again use nuclear weapons on the planet of Jebel. This time though, it was against their own. A dark side-powered virus had broken out, turning the vast majority of their army into Rakghouls. The plague was spreading as each Rakghoul corrupted more and more Mandos. Casus Fett arrived and decided to cut their losses, dropping a nuke on the surface and wiping out both his men and all others corrupted by the virus. As time went on, it became a weapon only seen in the Outer Rim and only occasionally used by powerful warlords. In fact, an attempt was made on Darth Plagueis' life when the Black Sun would drop a nuclear weapon on Plagueis' stronghold world of Sojourn. Not even his dark side alchemy beasts survived this explosion. During the Galactic Civil War, the Empire got their hands on a warhead, but the Rebellion managed to wrestle it from their control, smuggling it aboard an Imperial Star Destroyer, where it ultimately annihilated the ship from the inside. For an unknown reason, nuclear technology was not in widespread use in the galaxy, likely because there were much more dangerous substances that rendered nukes superfluous. 7. The Eclipse-class dreadnought. What's astounding about a lot of these weapons is that most of them could be stopped by a functional planetary shield. Just as starships can have deflector shields, many planets can actually have them as well. Usually they had to be wealthy and a developed world, but it was not uncommon for well-populated planets to make use of deflector technology. This protected their cities from asteroids, falling debris, and especially turbo laser blasts, keeping them protected from base Delta Zero operations. These invisible shields would also severely damage or destroy any ship that came into contact with them, unless they were lowered. But for this simple, yet effective defense, the Empire developed a countermeasure. The Eclipse-class dreadnought was a super star destroyer measuring 17.5 kilometers in length, only slightly smaller than Darth Vader's Executor. And upon its dark hull, it carried an axial super laser. This was a weapon that was essentially one of the Death Star's 8 component beams, but rather operating at 2/3 of the power. The Imperial Handbook states that its intended use was to penetrate planetary shields and to vaporize entire cities. But this was a gross understatement of the weapon's actual power. The axial super laser was capable of slashing straight through planetary shields to crack open the planet's crust and sear entire continental landmasses. A single shot from this behemoth could instantly incinerate millions. In open combat, the super laser was used to annihilate enemy capital ships, and none could stand against it. In accompaniment with the axial super laser, the Eclipse-class carried hundreds of turbo lasers, ion cannons, tractor beams, and even gravity well projectors that would rip ships straight out of hyperspace. In addition to its staggering firepower, its own hull and shields were so strong that it could ram enemy ships without hesitation. This was the reason for the large vertical fin molded on its front. The Eclipse was meant to be the successor of the Eye of Palpatine, and to revolutionize naval combat. It was planned for a release early in the Galactic Civil War, but it took as long to construct it as the Death Star 2, and so delays caused it to be produced in the year 4 ABY. By this point, Palpatine had already been defeated. However, when Sidious returned during the Dark Empire, he made the Eclipse his flagship. It caused havoc during his quest for revenge, but was ultimately destroyed when Luke and Leia interrupted the Emperor's Force Storm, causing his own power to sink his fleet. It was R2-D2 who facilitated the end of this particular dreadnought. At number 8, we have asteroid-based weaponry. No matter what battlefield you find yourself in, there are always environmental factors that you can use to your advantage. In space, you might as well harness the plentiful abundance of rocks that are often the size of small moons. In this section, we will cover both the plain Changa and the hammer station, since information is limited on both superweapons, and since they both sort of do the same thing, we've decided to put them in the same category. The plain Changa is only spoken of in historical documents, but was a superweapon uniquely developed by the Hutts. Long ago, before the Hutt species were crime lords, they were warlords. Terrifying in battle, the Hutts took over a large section of the Outer Rim, laying the groundwork for what would become Hutt space. And one of the tools at their disposal was a large orbital railgun that was said to fling asteroids at such speeds that it could crack open planets. The gun was built by the Sakaean slave species, who wrote poems about the anguish under the Hutt's control. Thousands of years later, Hammer Station was built on this same idea. Interestingly, this was one of the few superweapons developed by the Republic, and was used during the Great Galactic War. They had created it out of pure desperation when pressed by the Sith. Like the Eye of Palpatine, the prototype battle station was built inside of a massive asteroid. Its key feature was a combined tractor beam and massive gravity cannon. The tractor beam pulled in nearby asteroids, and the cannon launched them at near relativistic speeds. No single shield could handle the magnitude of the kinetic energy. When positioned over a planet, Hammer Station was capable of devastating entire cities with a single blow, but the attacks were so wild that they could not be tempered or made more precise. The asteroids caused planet-wide dust clouds and groundquakes, rendering entire worlds nearly uninhabitable after its use. Because of this, the Republic Senate could not, in good conscience, authorize its use, even against the Sith. And so, Hammer Station was abandoned, and its files were deemed classified. 10 years later, following the Cold War, Darth Malgus would seek out Hammer Station to be used against its creators. It would be Satele Shan who would rally a Republic interception force in order to keep this from happening. Number 9. The Dark Reaper. Imagine, if you will, a reality where the Sith Lord Darth Nihilus was a machine. If you can grasp those implications, then you will understand the function and terror of the Dark Reaper. This may be the weapon which perfectly exemplifies the design philosophy of the ancient Sith. Destroy your enemy in the most agonizing way possible. Make yourself stronger from it. Sidious described the machine as having the ability to drain the life out of an entire army, but in reality, the power of this weapon was so much more. The Dark Reaper was originally a machine created by the Sith during the Great Hyperspace War, which was Naga Sadow's era. It was kept in an armory on the planet of Thule until it was recovered by Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma. The Sith Lords used it against the Republic during their time, but Ulic turned back to the light side and told the Jedi the secret to defeating the Reaper. The Jedi broke the device apart, and its pieces were scattered amongst various worlds, but its nucleus, the most important piece, was buried on Raxus Prime. The nucleus of this machine is a sphere called the Force Harvester. This acted as Nihilus's Force Drain ability did, siphoning the life energy out of any organic material in its radius. Count Dooku studied the history of this machine and excavated the Force Harvester from the world of Raxus Prime. He then tested the weapon on one of the moons of Kashyyyk. Just the nucleus alone decimated the entire moon's forests, draining all life from them. Dooku proceeded to gather more energy from the oceans of Mon Calamari, and then from the worlds of Agamar and Bakura. The Force Harvester's power killed millions on each planet. Once he assembled the pieces of the main machine, Dooku went back to Thule and reconstructed the Dark Reaper in totality. But the Dark Reaper was said to not only magnify this drain ability, but transform the collected life force into powerful blasts of energy as well. The exact destructive output of these blasts is unknown, as the machine was never actually used to its full potential. Anakin Skywalker traveled to the tomb of Ulic Qel-Droma, communing with the spirit of the fallen Jedi, and from him, Anakin learned how to resist the power of the Harvester. Afterwards, Skywalker led an attack on Thule and managed to destroy the Dark Reaper once and for all. Number 10. The Ionic Ring. This creation was designed by Professor Ren Voles during his tenure on the Maw installation. We'll be mentioning the Maw installation a few times more, so it's important for you to know what it is. The Maw installation was a secret Imperial research facility developed by none other than Grand Moff Tarkin. It lay within the center of the Maw, which was a cluster of black holes and gravity anomalies in the deep core. The entire purpose of the facility was to research, design, and create superweapons for the Galactic Empire, and it was one of the very rare things in the Empire that Palpatine himself did not know about. Anyway, the Ionic Ring was a starship with a climatizer built into it. Its main function was the ability to control the weather of any planet it was near. Professor Voles, like many scientists at the Maw installation, believed that his work was being used for good. He had been convinced that the Ionic Ring was being used to alter the destructive forces of nature facing many Imperial worlds. It was intended to terraform any wasteland into a paradise for its inhabitants. And his test on the world of Zerm was successful, calming its notoriously deadly weather. Previously, Zerm's inhabitants had called it a hellhole because of the storms, but the Ionic Ring stabilized its atmosphere and had given them a better life. Had it continued being used for this purpose, it may have altered galactic life as we know it for the better. Instead, the ring was used for the exact opposite. It was placed under the command of Captain Bazorn, who had been tasked by Lord Vader to locate and punish rebel systems. The fruitful tool was used as a military weapon to destroy worlds instead of saving them. Its most prominent victim was the planet of Ryon, which was devastated by wild storms conjured by the ring. Captain Bazorn took the professor's daughter hostage in order to force him to keep using the climatizer. The next target on the hit list was Vol's own homeworld of Little Kessel. The Ionic Ring afflicted the world with groundquakes and tornadoes. But the professor, unable to see his work destroy his home, refused to continue, accepting whatever consequence and fate may come. But what he did not know was that Luke Skywalker and the rebels had already rescued his daughter. They were able to subsequently save Volz, but not before the professor set his machine to self-destruct. This might be one of the most tragic superweapons on the entire list, as it had a great potential for good. Its intention was purely benevolent. But just as the dark side twists all good intention, the Empire corrupted this machine to feed their insatiable lust of horror. Number 11. The Visual Electromagnetic Intensifier. Called VEI for short, the weapon was created by Pavel Lemelisk. Lemelisk was Palpatine's chief superweapon scientist, and the man who originally ran the Maw installation. This weapon was a network of satellites in a synchronous orbit above a target planet. Its function was to amplify the light and electromagnetic radiation of the nearby stars. This resulted in blinding and burning effects on the surface population. On the low end, it increased surface temperature and burned inhabitants alive. Left on long enough though, it boiled seas, caused catastrophic flooding, droughts, firestorms, and would literally scorch the ground eternally. It was originally intended as an Imperial siege weapon, but Lemelisk complained about it being difficult and time-consuming to deploy the satellites themselves. Because of this, not very many VEIs actually made it into service. Going back to the drawing board, Lemelisk devised an improvement on the design, and that design gives us number 12, the Orbital Nightcloak. Tweaked from the VEI brother, the Orbital Nightcloak was another satellite network, but one which performed the polar opposite of the function. Rather than intensifying light and electromagnetic wavelengths, it intercepted and nullified them. This plunged a target world into a constant night, controlled exclusively by the Empire. The result was mass agricultural die-off, planetary famine, eternal winter, and catastrophic ice buildup. While the VEI may have been more outwardly destructive, the Orbital Nightcloak might be the more sinister variant. The death it caused to planets was slower and much more painful. Having too much light was definitely apocalyptic, but having no light at all would plunge any population into madness. Imagine if this weapon were to be used against a planet that was used to a lot of sun, a planet like Tatooine, or a forest world like Kashyyyk. It would slowly and excruciatingly change the planet forever, possibly resulting in the mass death or extinction of all native surface life. But like the VEI, the Orbital Nightcloak had a fatal weakness. Wedge Antilles comments that the destruction of a single satellite would short out the entire network. Bevel Lemelis believed it was the purpose of the Imperial Navy to keep them safe, but Rogue Squadron has taken down an entire cloak with one X-Wing and a single proton torpedo. The Rebel General Medine pointed out that one might not even need a starfighter raid to accomplish this. A surface-to-air targeting missile could destroy a satellite from the ground. So use of either the Orbital Night Cloak or the VEI is pretty much a waste of time for the Empire, unless they have an extremely dense blockade and are able to confiscate ground weaponry as well. But if they already have a blockade and ground troops to do this, then what would be the point of either superweapon? So while these superweapons are inventive and definitely terrifying, they're basically obsolete unless used as punishment for an already oppressed world, or as a weapon against a primitive population. But so far, we've only been on the low end of destructive capability for our superweapons, believe it or not. With the next category, we're stepping into a realm of true planet-wide destruction. And that begins with number 13, the Badium weapons. We mentioned earlier that nuclear weapons were largely obsolete in the galaxy due to other substances. Badium is one of those substances. It was a synthetic chemical compound that was among the most dangerous and volatile materials in the entire galaxy. Most famously, Badium was used as the core of the average thermal detonator. It could be used in tiny quantities for precision explosions or melting. But unlike shrapnel grenades or other explosive materials, its destructive force was not out of control. Explosions were described as a fusion reaction, and they actually had a particle field that formed the outer surface of the blast sphere. What this did is contain the energy of the explosion inside a tight perimeter, allowing for precise destruction. But if one were to make weapons using quantities of Badium with wild abandon, the result would be a superweapon. During the Republic and the Sith Empire's Cold War, Badium bombs were used by the Sith. These had the destructive force to take out entire cities. The Voss capital of Voss Ka was nearly wiped off the map by one of these bombs, had it not been for the heroics of an Imperial agent. Much more powerful than this were the Badium missiles, which on the low end could end capital ships. On the high end, it could destroy moons. The Jedi Order managed to use some of these against the Yuzhong Vong during their invasion, and in the Second Galactic Civil War, Badium missiles annihilated both a capital ship and the moon of Borelio. But the most powerful of these weapons devised was the Badium fission device, which I'm sure you guessed it, had the capability to destroy a planet. These weapons were outlawed by the Republic, and even the Empire had difficulty acquiring one, and when they did, it was taken by the rebels. They intended to use it to destroy the Imperial shipyards orbiting the world of Bilibringi, but ultimately, the pilot delivering the device ditched it due to his unwillingness to sacrifice the Millennium Falcon. These weapons were not seen or used often because dealing with Badium was extremely dangerous. Even in factories where they make thermal detonators, there are import limitations on Badium munitions. Gathering enough of the substance to make a superweapon was difficult, but anything could go wrong during manufacturing that would result in total annihilation. In the case of these superweapons, the weakness is a simple matter of risk outweighing the reward. But that's not the case for number 14, World Devastators. When Emperor Palpatine returned from the dead in 10 ABY, he eschewed all subtlety and manipulations. He emerged as a true Sith Lord, a warlord of the past, and under that philosophy, he had about 3 different bombastic superweapons ready for use. The Eclipse dreadnaught was the first, but it was more of a personal touch. The World Devastators were the second, and they were meant to be the face of his success. They just might be one of the most efficient weapons on this entire list. By this point in time, the Starforge was ancient history, but that did not mean that Palpatine would not take inspiration from it. Designed by Umak Leth at the Maw installation, a World Devastator was a gigantic rectangular ship, one with 4 landing feet. Equipped with a powerful tractor beam, it would land on a world and literally tear the planet beneath it apart. The raw materials harvested from the planet were drawn into the World Devastator. There, they would be used as fuel for the machine, and as construction material for its internal factories. They then churned out starships and droids. These creations would be sent directly into battle right from the assembly line. The internal foundries could create anything from a starfighter or a speeder to a medium-sized cruiser. They could also use the materials to self-repair and self-improve. World Devastators were like giant living organisms, parasites that would harvest raw material from a world and grow larger. Interestingly, they also never grew the same way. Each one would upgrade itself differently, each one where it saw room for improvement. And because of this, no two mature world devastators were ever the same. Theoretically, with the proper amount of materials, one of these could grow large enough to produce another world devastator. It wasn't just the Starforge that Palpatine learned from though. He also remembered the strength of the Eye of Palpatine. That was its artificial intelligence. Each one of the superweapons were controlled by a central droid brain rather than fallible pilots and technicians. However, sentient crew members were aboard as they oversaw navigation, weapon systems, and factory production. So just like the Starforge, they were sentient, evolving machines, but without the drawback of corrupting the user to the dark side. And once again, Palpatine continues to improve on the past. Whereas the Starforge was quite weak externally, the World Devastators had shields so strong that even concentrated turbo blaster fire could not penetrate them. Most times when an enemy ship came in contact with the Devastator, it would result in that ship being consumed and used for raw materials. The kicker to all of this is that the Emperor deployed these horrific creations by the dozens. Not just one, but multiple world devastators would be sent to a target planet. It's almost unimaginable trying to fight one of these things when it's outwardly indestructible, destroying your planet and then creating its own reinforcements in the process. Palpatine actually announced his return by dispatching a fleet of world devastators to a number of New Republic worlds, including part to the core. One of the primary locations he sent them was Mon Calamari, which was a score Palpatine had wanted to settle from the Galactic Civil War. The aquatic planet had been slated for destruction by the first Death Star before it was destroyed, but now he could enact his revenge on the Mon Calamari people for joining the rebellion. Not to mention, with Coruscant currently under control of the Imperial Remnant, the ocean city of Dak was temporarily serving as the New Republic's capital. The heaviest fighting of the Dark Empire crisis occurred on Mon Calamari, resulting in the near total destruction of their people and world. The only thing that stopped these terrible machines was Luke Skywalker temporarily turning to the dark side and infiltrating the new Dark Empire. He had pretended to be Sidious's apprentice in order to remotely shut down all of the world devastators on Biss. But even then, while their tractor beams were off, their factories continued churning. This required Luke to relay Imperial data into Rebel hands so that they could destroy the machines properly. So without an inside man, the World Devastators are technically unstoppable from a battlefield perspective, making them one of the few superweapons considered perfect. And it all came down to Palpatine's genius in employing everything he learned from the ancient builders and his own past failures. If only he had shown the same cunning in the rest of his Dark Empire plans. Number 15. The Mass Shadow Generator. Its very name brings to mind the utmost of terror, not just because of what it did, but because of what it started. To explain how the Mass Shadow Generator works, we must first explain something about hyperspace. Hyperspace is a separate dimension that folds space and time. It is comprised of a system of tunnels that are layered on top of the galaxy. However, despite being a separate dimension, there are things from real space that have an effect on it. One such powerful effect on hyperspace is wells of gravity. Celestial bodies such as planets and moons have gravitational signatures within hyperspace. These signatures are what are called mass shadows. Calculating routes through hyperspace can be incredibly tricky because of these mass shadows. If you were to collide with one, you would be pulled straight out of hyperspace and impacted straight onto the surface of whatever planet, star, or moon had cast the shadow. In effect, the Mass Shadow Generator was a machine that had the ability to artificially replicate the gravitational signatures that celestial bodies cast to hyperspace. This causes absolutely devastating gravitational fluxes, which can then be weaponized. The weapon was initially created by the Zabrak tech specialist Bao Dur under orders from Revan. Revan had been at war with the Mandalorians for a while now. Both sides were trading blows and trading casualties, but the Republic side was winning. Yet Revan knew that the Mandalorians had spirits as strong as their Beskar. To break their will, to break the will to fight, he needed to do something big. And so the Mass Shadow Generator was devised. He lured the Mandalorians into a trap on Malachor 5 and planned to unleash it only if absolutely necessary. Revan ended up fighting Mandalore the Ultimate in a climactic duel and would ultimately win. However, his plans went awry when his general, Mitra Surik, became panicked in the middle of the battle. She had not heard from Revan since he went off to duel Mandalore, and the Republic fleet was beginning to lose. In haste, she acted outside of orders and commanded the Zabrak scientists to activate the mass shadow. The result would change galactic history. The machine created a gravity vortex that pulled down the capital ships from both sides of the war. Countless vessels were forcibly impacted into the planet's crust, annihilating millions of lives in an instant, cracking the planet to its core. The impact of the ships killed all of the crewmen, and most of Malachor V's population was wiped out. The world itself was turned into nothing more than a broken cluster of moon-sized debris, flimsily held together by gravitational anomalies. The sudden and cataclysmic amount of death sent a shockwave through the Force that killed any Jedi that were in the immediate vicinity. Revan only survived by having his capital ship being out of range. Mitra Surik was forced to immediately cut herself off from the Force in order to survive. This event would cause a wound, a literal tearing in the Force, a hole that was filled with screams and suffering. But that's not all that happened. The wound would focus itself, not on the planet, but on a single individual. A man of an unknown origin had been on Malachor V during the activation of the mass shadow generator. It is not known whether he was a Jedi, a Mandalorian, a Republic soldier, or just a regular individual. But he experienced a writhing emotion of agony so profound that the wound itself focused into him. It began consuming his mortal flesh, and soon his very essence. He was forced to feed on the life force of other beings to avoid what was left of him being totally consumed by the wound. The man decided it would be a mercy to finish the mass shadow generator's work, but on the rest of the galaxy instead. And so he became Darth Nihilus, the Eater of Worlds. One may argue that the historical effects of this weapon should make it rank much higher on the list, and indeed the fallout of the mass shadow generator produced a being that would nearly end the Jedi Order and the Republic as we know it. But the weapon in and of itself is the only thing that we are measuring here. It has the most potent destructive capability so far, and it also has one of the most creative methods of destruction. It's one thing to manipulate gravity, but to bring in both gravity and the power of hyperspace makes the mass shadow generator a marvel of engineering. But the thing that holds it back is its limited use. This particular weapon was specifically crafted for Malachor V, to manipulate its unique gravitational signature. It was theoretically proposed that the mass shadow generator could be modified, and could work with other systems, but it was never moved away from Malachor V, and logistically speaking, that would have been extremely difficult to pull off. It was a massive computer plugged into the planet itself, and of course when its main function basically destroyed the planet that it's on, it makes its number of uses extremely limited. The weapon did survive the first devastation, but it was activated yet again many years later when Mitra Surik returned to defeat Nihilus in the Sith Triumvirate. When this happened, the MSG totally destroyed the unstable remains of Malachor, taking itself and the planet along with it. It's an incredibly tragic weapon because Revan only went to use it as a very last resort. Revan had technically already won when it was used. He was just too late to broadcast his victory to the rest of his forces. From the actions of one hasty and a panicked commander, millions of lives were lost in an instant, and the galaxy was forever changed. Number 16, the Desillator. This is the part of the list that we now move from devastation to total destruction. The Desillator is a unique weapon because although it was officially built by the Sith, it was an amalgamation of Republic superweapons. During the Great Galactic War, the Republic initiated a superweapon program where they created 3 separate devices. The first is the Planet Prison, the Deathmark Laser, and the Shock Drum. This project was shut down before a lot of these weapons saw much use in the war, but the Sith would get their hands on this deadly trifecta and combine them into a weapon capable of total planetary annihilation. One of the first of its kind. So let's first talk about the pieces before we combine the whole. The Planet Prison is a creative concept wherein the machine will ionize the atmosphere of a world, creating a blanket that shuts down all machinery that comes into contact with it. This keeps any ships from arriving to or departing from the world, trapping all of the inhabitants. If any ship tries to pass through the ionized atmosphere, it will malfunction, sending it free-falling to the surface. The Deathmark laser was an orbital satellite that fired highly charged beams of energy at individual targets. It was ironically created to end the Alderaanian crisis, with as few lives lost as possible. The shock drum generated intense ultrasonic vibrations, those that destabilized technology within its ever-widening vicinity. The longer it was left on, the more intense the vibrations became. If left activated for an extended period of time, it could result in a massive seismic groundquake to the point of breaking continents. If left on at this stage, it would cause death to all organic life. Their molecules literally vibrated apart. But leave it to the Sith to see the potential in these individual weapons as one terrifying whole. Darth Angral was the mad genius to have the three weapons perform a fusion dance and become the Desillator. The Desillator was a planet-busting superweapon with 3 stages of destruction. The first stage used the planet prison to ionize the target world's atmosphere to keep its victims from evacuating. The second stage used an improved version of the Deathmark laser to ignite the planet's ionized atmosphere and turn the very air into a planet-wide firestorm. At the same time, the laser penetrated the planet's crust, making way for the third and the final stage. The Desillator would then use the technology developed from the shock drum to destabilize the planet's core with a series of powerful seismic vibrations. This would tear the world apart in a matter of hours, leaving an asteroid field in its place of what had once been an inhabitable world. The Desillator was a cruel weapon, as its world-busting power was slow, fear-inducing, and extremely painful. This superweapon was mounted on Darth Angral's ship, that he called the Oppressor, and was only ever successfully used once. He created it to exact revenge on the Jedi for the death of his son Tarnis, and desired to use it on the Jedi's ancestral homeworld of Tython. Its first and only test was done on the agricultural world of Euphrates. As anticipated, each of the 3 stages reached completion, and the world was reduced to a flaming asteroid field. Angral then turned his sights to Tython, but he didn't account for one critical weakness that the Desillator had. It had inherited a problem from the planet prison, which was that it consumed a significant amount of power and required an extended recharge period. He planned to use it straight off of its cooldown, and so started the battle with Tython early, but this gave enough time for the valiant Jedi to destroy Angral's ship, keeping their homeworld from being completely incinerated. Number 17, the Death Star. The classic, the original, the one thing that immediately comes to mind when one says the word superweapon. The Death Star and its sequel were the crowning jewel of the Galactic Empire, the Sith, and all of Palpatine's achievements. At its time, it was the most powerful superweapon ever devised. Nothing like it had been accomplished before. Of all of the weapons and machines in Star Wars lore, the Death Star is the most detailed of all of them. We could spend the length of this entire holocron going over the details of just this one battle station. So to keep ourselves on task, we'll just talk about the super laser itself. Many are credited with the ideas, designs, and development of the Death Star in Legends. It came from the desire of Emperor Palpatine to have the greatest weapon in the galaxy to solidify the power and authority of the Empire. But he wasn't the one who actually created the weapon. The project began as a proposal from Palpatine's personal starship designer, Wraith Sanar. Sanar conceived of something called the Expeditionary Battle Planetoid, which was a concept for the largest battle station ever created. He confided the idea to his friend Tarkin, but he never thought that it was feasible. Tarkin, however, had a different idea, and took the proposal directly to Palpatine. Sidious was deeply inspired by the idea, but decided to tweak it by magnifying its scope. Rather than just being a battle station, it would possess a super laser that could annihilate an entire planet. Palpatine would then work on manipulating the Republic and the Separatists into secretly building pieces for the ultimate weapon. Both sides believed that it was their ace in the hole for the Clone Wars, but they were only being used for a greater future. Much of the constructional framework was done on the Geonosian factories, led by Archduke Poggle the Lesser. But once the plans were stolen by Republic intelligence, Palpatine used fear to manipulate them into creating the weapon before the Separatists could complete their own. One of the final missions of the Clone Wars was the Battle of Mygeeto, where Palpatine had secretly tasked the Galactic Marines with extracting a supply of ancient Mygeetan crystals that were intended to be used as a power source. Once the Empire was instated, Sidious continued the funding of the construction of the ultimate weapon in complete secrecy. Having to hide it from both the Imperial Senate and the wider galaxy was the reason that the weapon took 2 decades to complete. Palpatine tasked Tarkin with putting together a team that could create the super laser using the Kyber crystal technology, an inspiration taken from the weapons of the ancient Sith. It was here where Tarkin founded the Maw installation that we spoke of earlier, and a team of brilliant scientists were assembled to complete the task. The most notable of which was the sinister Bevel Lemelisk and the brilliant but naive Dr. Kui Zux. Lemelisk himself was Palpatine's chief architect in developing superweapons, but he himself was just that, an architect. He needed scientists and engineers to really make the project a reality. So just as he had manipulated Professor Voles for the Ionic Ring, he lied to Dr. Kui Zux, telling her that the super laser was meant to blow apart dead, uninhabited worlds in order to mine precious materials at the core. And so together, they developed the concave dish composite beam super laser, the main weapon of the Death Star. Exactly a year ago, we posted a holocron that goes into strenuous detail examining every step of how the super laser works, so we'll quickly summarize it here. The core, or the engine of the Death Star, is a hypermatter annihilation reactor. As the name suggests, this was a type of fusion reactor that generates power by destroying hypermatter, the substance that fueled hyperdrives. By detonating this hypermatter, it generated an insane amount of power that was sent through special channels upwards towards the dish. The energy was forced through a tube that amplified its power several times over. It then charged 4 new engines that pressed the energy through giant kyber crystals like 8 lightsabers. These beams were then pinched, focused, and magnified before being forced out into the main dish area. Targeting field generators placed around the circle and a massive magnet behind the dish worked in tandem to combine the 8 lasers into a center, converging into a single point. This accumulated the full power of the entire reaction, charging up for the main shot, before being released in the form of a single beam towards a single target. When the super laser was fired from a fully powered ignition, it had the capability to completely obliterate any planetary body, reducing it to an asteroid field. The instantaneous nature of the destruction dwarfs the effectiveness of all of the other previously mentioned superweapons. Even planet busters like the Mass Shadow Generator and the Desillator are put to shame. The MSG was an incomplete weapon, requiring 2 activations to achieve this effect, and the Desillator took hours to destroy a world. But the Death Star took out a world faster than the snap of a finger. But like the Desillator, it did require a recharge period, but not nearly for as long. The Mark I super laser took a full 24 hours to recharge after one of the blasts. This was because there was only a single hypermatter reactor powering the entire station and the laser itself. And so, the weapon had to share power with the battle station. But to amend this on the DS2, there were 3 hypermatter reactors in that station. 1 reactor for the second Death Star itself, and 2 dedicated entirely to the Mark II super laser. This allowed the weapon to not only be even stronger than the first, but it could also be ready to fire only after 3 minutes. Both Death Stars were the magnum opus of the dark side, and they completely redefined the classification of a superweapon. But equally as famous as their destructive power was also their weakness. Hypermatter annihilation reactors give off a lot of heat and a lot of energy. Without giving it proper ventilation, it threatened to destroy the station with a single activation. To this end, Bevel Lemelisk was forced to place a thermal exhaust port that released this trapped heat, but it led down a straight shaft to the Death Star's main reactor. Lemelisk had hoped to amend this by designing it in a long, well-guarded trench, but it ended up being the Death Star's detriment. In canon, this was an intentional flaw placed there by Galen Erso, in hopes of seeing the invincible weapon destroyed one day. The second Death Star had a similar problem, but one that was exacerbated by its gargantuan size. Lemelisk had been tortured in unspeakable ways by Palpatine for the flaws of the DS1, so for its sequel, he designed the thermal exhaust to be let out in many tiny holes placed around the Death Star's outer shell. But this time, it was Palpatine's own pride that allowed the DS2's flaw to exist. He lured the rebellion into a trap on Endor, leaking information about the second Death Star being under construction. Palpatine had hoped that the weapon's vulnerable state would provide an irresistible bait to the Alliance, but the problem was, being under construction was not aesthetic. It was not finished, and had massive gaps that allowed for entire ships to be flown through it. Palpatine had believed this would not be a problem, since he had a massive fleet lying in wait, and the DS2 was fully operational. Not to mention, Sidious believed that the legion of his best troops on the Forest Moon would keep the shield generator from being destroyed. On top of all of this, Skywalker, who had been the only person in the galaxy with the ability to destroy the first station, was in his own throne room and not out in the fight. On paper, everything should have worked out. Everything except his overconfidence, which is exactly what Luke pointed out. Indeed, the Death Star and the DS-2 were impressive, but it is actually far from the most powerful superweapon ever created in the lore, and in fact, we have 6 more to go. Number 18. The Dark Saber. We do not speak of the Mandalorian Jedi weapon wielded by Tar Vizsla. This Dark Saber was the final weapon created by Pavel Lemelisk. Following the death of his master, Lemelisk was employed by Durga the Hutt to build him a personal weapon like the Death Star. Lemelisk was itching to get back into the superweapon business, so he took the job. Durga stole the Death Star plans from the New Republic and handed them over directly to Lemelisk. The architect decided to strip down the entire station just to the super laser. Durga did not have the resources or manpower to staff and power an entire Death Star, so everything except for the superweapon was superfluous. He then encased the super laser in a cylindrical durasteel shell, one with minimal crew amenities beyond an operation room. The final result looked like a giant Jedi lightsaber. And so, inspired by its resemblance, Lemelisk dubbed the weapon the Dark Saber. Because the weapon wasn't also having to power an entire battle station around it, Lemelisk was able to allocate more power into the laser itself. Lemelisk also moved the super laser's focusing eye so that the beam could be released directly out of the weapon's end, thus making a straight shot through the machine that allowed for greater energy conversion. As a result, the Dark Saber potentially had greater firepower and recharge rate than either Death Star. Along with this, the Dark Saber's stripped down size was more malleable and easier to operate. It only required 1/1000th of the computer systems that the original Death Star needed. It was meant to be Pavel Lemelisk's finest creation, but it turned out to be one of the most disappointing superweapons ever created. Due to subpar materials provided by the Hutt and the shoddy construction work done by alien hive mind species, the Dark Saber did not turn out as well as Lemelisk had designed it. He lost faith in the project even before it was finished, and deduced that any use of it would cause catastrophic damage to the weapon itself. However, Durga the Hutt would not budge, and began cutting corners endlessly, this ultimately being the Dark Saber's demise. When the New Republic discovered the weapon, they sent a fleet to stop it. Durga attempted to fire it, but its systems predictably malfunctioned because of its poor construction. It was then unceremoniously crushed between 2 asteroids, never having destroyed anything but itself. Number 19. The Galaxy Gun. The third and the final superweapon of the Dark Empire presents itself as the Galaxy Gun. After the Eclipse-class dreadnought and the World Devastators came this marvel of engineering. Once again learning from the past mistakes, Emperor Palpatine decided that it was too dangerous to have one superweapon be present at the world that it intended to destroy. It was far more advantageous to have the weapon itself be at a fortified location, one with the ability to take out any target from a great distance. And it was from this brainchild came the unfair reality of the Galaxy Gun, a planet-destroying torpedo launcher that never had to leave home. The Galaxy Gun measured 7¼ kilometers long, which is almost the length of 5 Star Destroyers lined up end to end. It was permanently stationed in the orbit of the world of Biss, the Emperor's stronghold world. The ammunition of the gun were light-speed torpedoes, missiles outfitted with their own hyperdrives and defensive systems as well. Once fired, the torpedoes entered hyperspace and would emerge anywhere in the galaxy that Palpatine chose. They were so fast that they rivaled the Millennium Falcon in hyperspace, and could reach the outer rim from the deep core in a matter of hours, dropping out of hyperspace to lock on its target. The missiles integrated defensive systems automatically, and defended it from incoming enemy vessels. Just to be even more unsportsmanlike, they also possessed deflector shields and armored plating to protect against both ion cannon and turbo laser fire. The missiles were outfitted with particle disintegrator warheads. When they struck a world, the energized warhead exploded, setting off a series of atomic chain reactions that would spread across the surface, converting matter to energy that consumed everything in its path. It was capable of destroying an entire world if the nuclear reactions were sustained until all available matter had been consumed. But the setting could be lowered to only city level if desired, allowing Palpatine to destroy large and small targets alike. The position of the Galaxy Gun provided its greatest advantage. On Biss, it was defended by a massive Imperial fleet. The New Republic could not get anywhere near the gun without courting a kamikaze mission on the most heavily fortified planet in the entire Empire. Even the Republic commando and sabotage teams were found and killed before they could ever get close. The New Republic spies had been able to inform them of the weapon, allowing them to evacuate the planet of the gun's first target. This was the Pinnacle Moon, a moon well inhabited by a native species and housed one of the New Republic's bases. Within hours, the moon was wiped off the face of the galaxy. The resurrected Palpatine became drunk with this power and continued launching projectiles all over the galaxy. He destroyed several New Republic worlds and crippled their government, allowing his empire to regain key territories in the Inner Rim. Finally, he was able to use the destructive power of the Death Star with wild abandon, and no one could stop him. No one except his own men. This time, it was his excessive usage of the weapon that would be Palpatine's downfall. Several high-ranking Imperial officers were disturbed by their cloned Emperor's erratic behavior, and so they conspired with an ex-royal guard by the name of Karnor Jax to finally destroy the Emperor. Jax paid off the Emperor's physician to sabotage all of his cloned bodies. Then, he had as many destroyed as possible. The Emperor lost his life in his climactic battle with Luke Skywalker, leaving only a broken and a decrepit cloned body for his spirit to be transferred into. After this defeat, R2-D2 remotely took control of the Eclipse-class Star Destroyer and set it on a collision course with the Galaxy Gun, in the process destroying both superweapons simultaneously. If you take anything from this holocron, it's that R2-D2 is a legend at destroying superweapons. Just like with the World Devastators, the Galaxy Gun was by all accounts invincible, and the galaxy was at Palpatine's mercy, just the way he always wanted. He had a literal gun to the galaxy's head, hence the weapon's name. All three weapons of the Dark Empire had reached near perfection, and every one of them had to be taken down from the inside under very special circumstances. In the case of the Galaxy Gun, even the Empire itself had to conspire against Sidious to bring it down. But with this, we have reached a surprising threshold. When machines of mass destruction reach a point where they can take out entire planets in the blink of an eye, then what's next? Well, what about an entire solar system? Number 20, the Corsair. Let's turn the clock way back and discover Palpatine's inspiration behind his Kyber technology weaponry. It was the Corsair that finds itself as the accused. The ship was one of the many horrid inventions of the Sith sorcerer Naga Sadow, one of the most powerful Dark Lords in history. The weapon existed during the Great Hyperspace War, and was a modified Darafin-class battleship that served as Sadow's flagship. At only 215 meters in length, it required a relatively tiny crew of 25, but could also be operated by only one. Rather than a standard control board, the ship was outfitted with an array of crystals. By using the dark side of the Force, the captain could tap into the ship through the crystals and control it. The Corsair had a Class 4 hyperdrive, a few point defense laser cannons, and very heavy concussion missiles. This was before the time of deflector technology, so it had exceptionally powerful armoring as well. Despite its size, it was quite nimble, able to weave through star clusters with ease. But it was none of these properties that made it so dangerous. The crystals that controlled the ship had been tainted and morphed by Sith magic. They possessed nigh unimaginable power of interfering with stars themselves. Through channeling the dark side into the ship, one could do anything from creating solar flares to tearing out a star's core. One of the first uses of the power was the Great Hyperspace War, and the weapon ultimately turned the entire conflict into Sadow's favor. The Battle of Koros Major ended in disaster when Sadow's apprentice, Gav Daragon, betrayed him. The already conflicted young man was brought back to the light side by his sister, and he then sabotaged the Sith's war effort. The ever-devious Naga Sadow retreated to the star known as Primus Galud and tricked Daragon into meeting him face to face. But by the time Daragon received Sadow's meditation sphere, the Dark Lord had escaped. A Republic fleet soon arrived on the scene, but it was a trap. Within the Corsair, Sadow had caused the star to flare, destroying most of the Republic fleet and killing Gav. He then used the power of the star to cover his escape back to Korriban. When the Great Hyperspace War ended, Naga Sadow was sent into hiding on Yavin 4. There, he buried the Corsair beneath one of his monuments, aptly naming it the Temple of Fire. A millennium later, it was Exar Kun who would take over the mantle of the Dark Lord and would uncover the Corsair on Yavin. Exar Kun's use of the weapon altered the entire course of Jedi history. Kun had discovered that one of his underlings, Alima Keto, was conspiring against him. She had already caused Ulic Qel-Droma to be captured on Coruscant, prompting Exar to have to go save him. And so, the Sith Lord decided to manipulate her to take care of two problems at once. Exar granted her command over the Corsair, only briefly teaching her how to use it before he sent her directly into the battle. Exar gave her instructions to lure the Jedi fleet into a trap on the Kron Cluster and to use the ship to destroy them there. The Kron Cluster was 7 unsable stars that were positioned nearby the system containing the Jedi homeworld of Ossus. As anticipated, the Jedi Starfighter Corps engaged the Sith ship, and Alima Keto used its power to tear the core out of one of the stars. This completely destabilized it, causing a chain reaction that caused the Kron Cluster to go supernova. Both the Jedi Fighter Corps and the Corsair with Alima went up in flames, and the burning shockwave went soaring through space, heading directly for Ossus. The Jedi Order scrambled to escape, trying to save as much of their precious knowledge from the library as possible. And it was here when Exar Kun would launch a secondary attack, thieving many artifacts for himself, stripping the world of them. Many of the Jedi did make it off of Ossus by the time the Inferno reached them, but the world itself could not be saved. The entire surface was razed and scorched, obliterating tens of thousands of years of Jedi history and knowledge. It is unknown how many other worlds were decimated by the Kron Cluster, but it could have been hundreds. What happened to Ossus would forever change the way the Jedi operated and approached habitation. This would cause a domino effect, having the Council forbid Jedi from having families and independent lives. Instead, they now required all of their members to remain in one mutual location. The Jedi being spread around the galaxy was one of the many things the Council blamed for Ossus being so vulnerable at the time. Many of the superweapons on this list are marvelous and have feats of technological design, but the Corsair sets itself apart by being purely based in Sith magic, channeled into a warship. It is the crowning achievement of one of the greatest Sith sorcerers to ever live, and would go on to cause one of the greatest upsets in the Jedi Order's existence. Despite being a primitive weapon from a bygone era, it deserves respect for making it in the top 5 strongest superweapons that we have researched. But we still have 3 more to discuss, and we enter the upper echelon with number 21, the Cosmic Turbine. The grandiose name belongs to a machine with an equally grandiose origin. It was never intended to be a superweapon at all, in fact, but it was a construction tool created by the ancient race of Celestials. For those of you that need a refresher, the Celestials were a race of supernaturally powerful beings that lived during the primordial era of the galaxy. They created many strange force-based machinery, which altered the spacescape of the galaxy as we know it. After designing many technological wonders, they mysteriously vanished from history, with their constructs being the only remaining evidence of their existence. The Cosmic Turbine was one of these machines, and its function was the ability to manipulate gravity on a massive scale, far outclassing the capabilities of the Mass Shadow Generator. The MSG manipulated gravity to destroy. The turbine used it to reposition entire worlds and stars. In fact, many worlds such as Corellia were thought to have been artificially created and then moved around by these machines. But the one system that owes both its life and death to the turbine was the Voltar system. This was where the Cosmic Turbine remained inactive for eons, until the year 4250 BBY. In that year, the Jedi experienced their 3rd Great Schism. The Dark Jedi, which resulted from the split, were driven off of Coruscant and took up residence in the Voltar system. There, the Darksiders discovered the Cosmic Turbine, as well as other unnamed celestial machinery. They studied its power and desired to use it for revenge against the Jedi. Intending to unleash as much destruction as possible, the Dark Jedi activated the Cosmic Turbine. However, they quickly discovered that control over these machines proved to be far beyond their abilities. Several days into the Darksiders' attempt to use the technology, a catastrophic accident occurred, one resulting in the total destruction of the entire system, including the Dark Jedi and the machines. This would go down in Republic history as the Voltar Cataclysm, all owing to the mass gravitational abilities of this Cosmic Turbine. It's a shame how many of these superweapons were intended for purposes of good, but their construction twisted for the cruelest kinds of evil. This is also the story for our penultimate superweapon, number 22, the Suncrusher. Star-busting abilities did not belong to the ancient Sith alone. The Empire wanted a slice of that power as well, which is why they developed the Suncrusher. This was described as being no bigger than a starfighter, and thorn-shaped, flying upright the way that Fett's Slave 1 does. But despite its very small size, it could deliver destruction of a magnitude that dwarfed even the Death Star. True to its name, the Suncrusher's main weapon was firing resonance torpedoes. Each torpedo resembled an oval-shaped plasma discharge, and when activated, it flew towards the target sun at near light-speed velocity. Upon impact, the torpedo burrowed into the star's core, releasing dense packets of energy that rendered the star's core unstable, initiating a chain reaction that forced any size of star to go supernova. But the second reason the Suncrusher was so impressive was because of its indestructibility. This was easily the toughest weapon on our list. The secret was its layered quantum crystalline armor, a material so strong that it could perfectly repel even turbo laser shots. Han Solo once in the lore rammed the Suncrusher straight through the bridge of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer without it taking any damage. When the New Republic wanted to put it somewhere out of reach, they remotely flew the Suncrusher into the heart of Yavin Prime, the gas giant. There, it was able to rest perfectly fine, resisting all crushing gravity. The Suncrusher literally slept in a star. You see, unlike the Corsair, this weapon was designed to actually withstand the destruction that it inflicted. So when a star went supernova from its resonance torpedoes, the weapon itself would be perfectly safe from the blast. It even once tanked a shot from the prototype Death Star super laser, though its engine system did sustain some damage. This weapon was invented and designed by Dr. Key Zux in the Maw installation as well. Like her work on the Death Star, she was told the Suncrusher would be used for good, for mining operations too dangerous for other ships. She was, unfortunately, too naive, and blind to see the truth in front of her, until it was Han Solo who forced her to confront it. After that, the Doctor devoted all of her expertise to helping the New Republic deal with this new superweapon. The weapon had been created many years after the Emperor's death, and was another rare project that was fortunately unknown to him, since it remained at the installation until 12 ABY. Unfortunately, one of Luke's students, Kip Duran, was manipulated to the dark side, and would take the Suncrusher on a rampage against Imperial worlds, destroying many stars, rendering all Imperial remnant holdouts to dust. Eventually, Sense was talked into the Jedi, and he managed to destroy the Suncrusher only by flying it directly into a black hole. We have placed the Suncrusher above the Cosmic Turbine since it was able to be used more than once. Not to mention, it could also withstand its own destructive force, which makes it one of the only superweapons with the ability to do so. Back in the day, the EU community harshly criticized the Suncrusher. This was the main target of accusations that Legends riders kept trying to outdo the Death Star with more and more hyperbolic weaponry. We'll let you be the judge of that for yourself though. But critics of the Suncrusher clearly were not aware of the final superweapon that we have on this list. A machine with promises of such destruction that it's not entirely known if it even works. Darkening the final slot in today's holocron is number 23, the Shocken device. Beyond planets, beyond stars, beyond star systems, what could possibly surpass the destructive powers of superweapons that we have mentioned so far? Assuming the Shocken device even works, it eclipses the abilities of this entire list combined, as its creator makes the bold statement that if activated, the Shocken device would annihilate the entire universe, presumably kickstarting the birth of a brand new one. But how is this even possible, you ask? Pavel Lemelisk offers a few rumors on how it works. Some say it will ignite the entire galaxy into a scorching inferno, steadily incinerating everything around it. Others claim it will collapse the universe into a singularity, but the device's creator explained it like this. The device destroyed the planet of Shocken, and then hurled its fragments at sublight speeds to collide with neighboring worlds. The planets would then be knocked out of their orbit, and sent poolballing across the galaxy, colliding with even more celestial bodies, then repeating this over and over again. This would theoretically set off a chain reaction that would gradually destroy all matter and end the universe. The device was created by an unknown Shockenese scientist, one that believed that artificially generating a new Big Bang would be the answer to a better tomorrow. He spent his life perfecting and constructing the device, but luckily never got depressed enough to actually use it. He died before it was ever activated, taking all of the machine's secrets with him. And the people of Shocken, too afraid of the device to so much as destroy it, buried it on their world and left it alone. The Shocken device, though, was activated in 4 ABY by a con artist, not knowing what it actually was going to do. Luke Skywalker and his friends showed up not too long afterward, while the device was still in its countdown phase. Luke Skywalker eventually discovered the true purpose of the machine and shut it down before it reached 1, albeit narrowly. Following this event, Luke would contemplate whether it was even possible for this machine to function like it said it did. Luckily though, Luke would never find out. The Shocken device appears only one time in all of Star Wars lore, and that is in the 1984 Star Wars comic run in issue number 87. The Empire was apparently aware of this weapon, but had enough sense to leave it alone. Even Palpatine said nah. Luke would later comment that he was surprised to see that the Empire actually knew of it. It seems that even though the Sith ought to always think on a grand scale, this particular scale was a bit too grand even for Sidious. In many ways, superweapons have served as the cornerstone of Star Wars storytelling. Sometimes it takes a threat that's larger than life for beings like Jedi to experience fear. But in many cases, the great sizes of these machines and the hubris of their creators are their ultimate downfall. In terms of practicality, that's a very different conversation. The destructive capability of these weapons are undeniable, but whether or not they're actually useful in most situations is subject for debate. Some weapons, like the Orbital Night Cloak, are very interesting and creative, but have flaws that render them obsolete. Then there are weapons like the World Devastators or the Galaxy Gun. They are so close to perfect in their design and function that it literally takes a plot contrivance for them to ever be defeated. But I think what I enjoy most about these many superweapons is the variety in which they inflict their destruction. In Legends, you have machines that make use of so many different elements, each one seemingly more terrifying than the last. You might see something that crushes a world under its own gravity, something that transforms a planet's atmosphere to fire, and something that siphons a planet or a star's own matter just to turn it into more machines of death. But what do you think, my friends? Of all of the superweapons on this list, which would you say fascinates you the most? As always, thank you so much for watching and for supporting the archives, especially these longer videos. We really enjoy what we do and deeply appreciate you guys joining us each and every time. So until the next one, keep an eye on the skies, and may the Force be with you.